we talking. Man to man, they can't guard me. Man to man, they don't wanna see us. Man to man, they don't know how to beat us. Man to man, 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 yeah, man. Must be the struggle that's in me, that's why I want it so bad. Must be the hustler in me that keep my foot on the gas. When you got it from nothing and hard times ain't so bad, just know I'm coming for everything that they said I couldn't have. I put my life inside it, yeah, I kept it solid. Yeah, I played the field, that's how I feel about it. We put numbers on the board, we always up the score. Yeah, we stuck to the plan and never ran. Now they can't see it, man. Yeah, we talking, man to man, they can't guard me. Man to man, they don't wanna see us. Man to man, they don't know how to beat us. Man to man, man to man, man to man.
Yo, what's going on, man? We back at it again. One half of the Man to Man Pod. I'm AB. Got my co-host D Butt.
Yes, sir.
Man, and today we are welcome with a very, very special guest. A man of many titles. 17, 18 years at San Diego Tribune, Sports Illustrated, NFL Network. A member of the Hall of Fame committee, but one of the most important is a Howard University alum, Jim Trotter. Man, appreciate you for joining us.
No, man, I'm honored to be on, man. It's one of the best podcasts going. So, and you know how I feel about you two. So to be given an invite, I'm humbled, I'm honored, man. So hopefully I'll do it justice.
Nah, man.
Definitely appreciate you jumping on the show with us, man. We have obviously a lot of players on, but I think they should and they need to see, the other sides of the game. Obviously, the media aspect, being a writer, being a reporter, there's so many things that you see, obviously, that you do report on that you don't. So your POV is important for not only us to hear and to understand, but the listeners, the fans, man. So I'm excited to get into a lot of stuff with you today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, man. Let's just jump from the start, man. Let's just talk about your background. Your upbringing, your household, and eventually, man, what kind of led you to your passion as far as reporting and being able to tell stories.
Yeah, man, my story is not that different from a lot of folks. I grew up in Northern California, was born in San Francisco, single parent household, and we didn't have much money, so we were kind of rent hopping what seemed like month to month, but it was more year to year. So never really established serious roots. But what it did, is it instilled something in me that I knew coming up I wanted more. I wanted more than that. There's a humbling experience as a young man, as a child, when you go in the store and you're taking what was then food stamps. I know they have a different name for it now, but I always felt back then that, folks kind of looked at you funny, looked at you differently when you did something like that. And so I always had this thing in my mind from a very young age that I wanted to be successful, that I wanted to be able to carry, my weight, wanted to have a family, be a family man, be there for my wife, my kids, that sort of thing. And, it's something that's just has never left me, I should say. So just came up through that, went to high school, at a predominantly white high school. And my senior year, our Black Student Union in California, they have a state convention. And that year, the convention was down on the UCLA campus. And neither of my parents graduated high school, I should say. So college was never really a big discussion in the house. Mm-hmm. And so we're at this BSU state convention, and one of the forums was historically Black colleges and universities, which I'm going to be honest, I had never heard of, because again, my parents hadn't graduated high school, so college wasn't talked about a lot. So I go to this forum, And one of the panelists was from Howard. And as I'm listening to the panelists speak, I'm like, man, I want to be a part of that. And so immediately, it was in the spring, I applied to Howard. I got accepted. I didn't have the money to go. So I spent 2 years. I said, I'll take 2 years to build up my GEs and then I'll transfer. And the positive about that is while I was doing that at Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, I met the person who is now my wife. So it was a positive. You know, they always say God has a plan.
Yeah.
And I stayed there for 2 years, went to Howard, and I knew right when I got to college, I knew I wanted to get into sports writing because like many of us, you go high school and you play football and all that kind of stuff. But I'm real with myself about my strengths and my weaknesses. And I knew I was never going to be good enough to play in the NFL. So when some of these small colleges came, it was like, you know what, I could go do it, but I'm more focused on now trying to prepare myself for a life, a successful life. Yeah. And so I didn't play, but I figured out one way to stay close to the game was by being a sports writer. And so that was my focus from the time that I left high school until today. And when I got to Howard, as you know, AB, one of the guys there was Ed Hill, the sports information director. Yeah. And one of the great things about Ed is he would take students in and treat you as if you were his assistant. So you got to write, you got to work games, you got to do all that. You got some practical experience. Yeah. For me, that was invaluable. And it set the table for really where I am today, going from Howard to starting out the Muskegon Chronicle, then to the Morning News Tribune of Tacoma, then the San Diego Union Tribune, where I thought I was going to retire after 18 years before Sports Illustrated came calling, and then to ESPN, and now at NFL Network. So it's just been sort of a progression. And, you know, each step of the way you learn more about yourself, and ultimately you get to a point where I'm at now where you really learn what your purpose is. You start asking, as you get older, you start asking yourself questions about what's my purpose in this business. You know, when you're young, you're trying to make your way, you're trying to establish your name, all that kind of stuff. And once you do that, at least for me, the question became, what's my purpose? And really in 2016, when Colin first took that knee, and I was at ESPN, I'll never forget this moment. I know I'm rambling here, but I'll never forget this moment where the story comes out that he's demonstrating against police brutality. And I live in San Diego. The 49ers last preseason game following the breaking of that story by Steve Weiss was that the 49ers were playing their final preseason game in San Diego on Military Appreciation Night. Mm-hmm. Right. So they have me cover the game. And so before the game, I remember I'm doing a live shot for SportsCenter, and the sports anchor at that time starts to frame the question in the way of Colin being disrespectful to the media and the flag and all this other kind of stuff. And it was literally in that moment while I'm on air listening to the framing of the question where I said to myself, you got one or two ways to go here. You can either let this person frame this wrongly, or you can say, no, that's not what's happening here, and reshape the narrative. And I decided in that moment, I'm not going to let him frame this wrongly. It's too important. And from that moment forward, my purpose has kind of been, I realized in this business and however many years I have left, is to, number one, speak up for those who don't have a voice, to give them a voice, and two, to address some of the inequities that go on in our business and in our game that others might not be addressing. And lastly, it was to try as best I can to humanize these players and show them to be more than just football players. You know, we have that whole shut up and dribble thing. But as you guys know, and as you guys are proving, you know, athletes are about a lot more than just the game that they play. And so really those became kind of the pillars of what I'm trying to do, again, as I go forward and however many years I have left in the business.
Yeah, media is powerful, man, and obviously controlling and shaping narratives. And when you're, I guess, going against what everybody's trying, because we're both in the league at that time. And I remember how questions would be framed, you know, to me about it. And I'm like, come on, man. Every time somebody puts a mic in front of Colin's face, he says the same things on what he's protesting against. So the message isn't getting screwed up. It's everybody changing it. But I want to go back a little bit. to them high school days, 'cause you kind of glossed over the sports part. I got to know what sports you played in high school first, kind of what you learned from the sports you played, and then what went into that decision but going so far away from, home and going across the country to go to Howard.
Yeah, it was for me. I played football and ran track and played a little baseball. But again, I was never great at anything. I was good. I was decent, but I knew my strengths and weaknesses. One thing I always try and be real with myself about, even now as a journalist, when I get critiqued, my thing is never to say when someone critiques me, let's say negatively, to right off the bat say, oh, they're just hating, or they're this or they're that. My first response is, okay, is there anything that they are saying in there that is actually true that I can take and learn from? And if there is, then I try and take from that and learn from it. And if some stuff is in there that ain't right, that I know ain't right and whatever, I just push that to the side. So for me in high school, when I was playing, I love the game. I love the camaraderie. I love the fact how sports can it truly can bring everyone together, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds, all that kind of stuff, where you come together for a common goal. I think that's so powerful. And yet again, I knew I was never going to be good enough to be in you guys' shoes and play in the NFL. So I wanted to find a way to just stay close to the game in some sort of way. And I wanted to write when I was in high school, but I couldn't because of the conflict of interest. You can't be writing about your teammates. And
fact.
Right.
So it was like I couldn't do it then. And so the minute I got out of high school, right away, my focus was on becoming a sports writer. And everything that I did from that point forward was focused on that.
And D-Buck kind of touched on it in his latter part of the question, but going from Northern California across the country to Howard University, like how was that? And like you said, you attended a predominantly white high school, going to an HBCU. Was there a culture shock there, or how was your first experience? And at the end of the day, like how did your experience at Howard University shape you as a man and as a writer?
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing because I had never been on a plane before I went to Howard. That's like I said, we didn't have much money. Yeah. So that wasn't the way that we traveled or anything. Any trips that we took were by car. We sit in the back seat on a long trip. So I had never been on a plane. And then I'll never forget this. I land in DC and this taxi, picks me up. And all of a sudden the conversation becomes about go-go music. Yeah. Well, I'm out in Northern California. We have never heard of go-go music. And so, and I could tell right away, he's kind of looking at me sideways, like, you don't know what this is and whatnot and whatnot. And I'm like, damn, already I'm off to a bad start here, So I learned about go-go music real quick. Yeah. And, but for me, stepping on the campus at Howard, man, and I don't want to make this sound so dramatic or whatnot, but it was life-changing, to be around people who look like you, who share some of the same experiences that you do, and who are motivated to be successful. Because we know out in the broader culture or society, the narratives they put out about Black folk. Yeah. And so to be around folks who are young, beautiful, intelligent, striving for greatness, it was huge for me. And to sit in a classroom where I felt like people were invested in me and I was not just a number, that they actually cared about whether or not I succeeded. Man, I'm not here today without that, So it was life-changing for me. It was, I owe everything to Howard. And that's why, behind me, I got, the helmet and this, that, and I always try and rep my university to let folks who might not be aware of HBCUs or Howard or whatever, to do a little research, understand their place in history and how they can impact them. I'm telling you, man, it's hard to put into words that feeling when you come from, again, a predominantly white high school and you step on and literally almost all Black college. I know it has changed now with federal funding and whatnot. And we're seeing more integration on HBCU campuses. But to step in a place where it is about your culture and your people and striving for greatness, it doesn't get better than that, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that got to be a special. I'm kind of jealous. I'm jealous, man. Obviously, growing up in South Florida, it's a melting pot, a lot. And the younger I was, the more black people I was around. Then high school was a little more diverse, and then went to college, and it was the complete opposite for me. That was I'm not only am I going to a predominantly white institution, but I was going to Connecticut, Storrs, Connecticut, coming from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So outside of the athletic program, once you got past those, kind of basic classes, man, I was probably one of maybe two, if that, black men in these classes. So that was a completely different. I think it helped in some ways. It helped me, be able to know how to deal with white people and talk to and know even their different experiences. And then you kind of realize, okay, it's two different Americas.
Yeah.
But when you really have those conversations and backgrounds and things, like, oh wow, this is really different. So it was eye-opening from that standpoint. But definitely envious. I didn't get that HBCU experience that I hear about all the time from AB. Hey. Don't let a month go by.
AB didn't get to see it because obviously he was playing, but like halftime, when you got the battle of the bands and whatnot, it was just so different from anything I had ever experienced. And you just you feel it in you. I can't even tell you, I can't even explain for people. It's something you have to experience, but you feel it, internally in every fiber in you when you sit there and you see the bands battling and we all know, at least at Howard, it wasn't even about the football games, man. People came there for the band, the shows at halftime. And no disrespect to AB, but he knows.
I get it. I mean, that's what it was. That's what it was. There's no hate. And sometimes I'm in there in the locker room at halftime, jealous because I can't see the Marching 100 or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? So it was just part of it. But like you said, it was the culture, man, and just like you said, Jim, man, I appreciated it. I love it till this day. So
when you can say, like, I graduated in '86, when you can say now, however many years later, that we're talking decades, that you would do it all over again and you wouldn't change anything. I mean, that tells you what it was like and what it was about, And so I tried to get my daughters to go, but they didn't want to leave, the state. They wanted to stay home, close to home. Because it's just, I couldn't put into words to them what it really means and how it impacts you. So when I couldn't get them to go to Howard, then I tried Spelman. I was trying to get them down to Spelman, and it's just when you talk about reinforcing what it means to be a Black person in America and your self-worth and that rich culture that you come from, and that your people come from and the things that they have experienced and how that impacts you going forward in terms of what it means for you to lay a new foundation for those who are coming behind you. And that's why even in this business now, as I go forward, man, when young Blacks come and want to talk to me about the business and whatnot, I try and give them all I can and all the time that I have. Because that's what it's about. You're supposed to reach back and bring along that next generation, and hopefully they learn from you and it gets better. Each your building blocks. But it was just special. It really was.
I want to ask you who because we always, and obviously me and AB and whatever players we talk to, we kind of ask them, who are those, I guess, OGs in the locker room or off the field, off the court or whatever, who helped bring you along the way, who helped show you road, who was that mentor? Did you have someone in your life or multiple people, in the writing space and the reporting space that helped you along the way early on?
Yeah, well, one of the people we mentioned earlier was Ed Hill, at Howard Sports Information Director. He was really big for me in terms of giving me an opportunity to do things and really talking to me about the business, having been in it before, about what I could expect out in the quote unquote real world. Yeah. The person who got me into sports writing truly and made me believe that it was possible was Ralph Wiley, the late Ralph Wiley. And I never knew him. I never met him. But for me as a young Black to see a Black man on television, going from the Oakland newspaper to Sports Illustrated to being on Sports Reporter back in the day and those sorts of things, to see a black man up there giving his point of view unapologetically, it was like, wow, and people have to understand this is before the internet. So it wasn't like I could just go read Ralph Wiley anytime I wanted or see him anytime, or he was easily accessible in terms of the content. But to see him in those moments was so powerful. It was like, man, you can do this. And then as I'm growing up in the Bay Area and I'm reading the San Francisco Chronicle and I'm reading about the Warriors and whatnot, and then to realize that the writer at that time was Ron Thomas, who at the time I didn't know, but he's a black man who now teaches at Morehouse. And it was like, man, there's more affirmation that I can do this, that I can make it. The sad part is, for me at least, coming up through the ranks in this, every place I've worked, only once, in terms of newspapers, did I have another black in the sports department as a writer. When I was in Tacoma at the Morning News Tribune, Sheldon Spencer was there. And when I was in San Diego, they tell me I was the first black ever in the sports department in terms of writer. And I mean, I'm there 18 years and there was never another one with me during that time. So it's kind of a lonely place in this business. And then obviously you get, the Sports Illustrated and there are more. And obviously at ESPN now, there were more. And then at NFL Network now, there's, Steve Weiss and Jeffrey Chidia and I. But it can be a lonely place. And so you've got to be mentally strong. And I'll say this to you. One of the reasons that I'm able to focus on the things that I focus on now is because I feel that I've earned that right. Throughout the years, I paid my dues. I've earned my credibility. And now I can speak on things that maybe when I was younger, it's not that I didn't feel confident about it, but maybe I felt alone, that I didn't have sort of a support system to speak on certain things. And so, for instance, one of my focuses now, besides dealing with, diversity, equity, and inclusion within the NFL, is also within our media ranks. So, for instance, in the Hall of Fame, there's a writer award, and it used to be called the McCann Award. And last year they changed it to the Bill Nunn Jr. Award. And everyone who follows football knows Bill Nunn Jr. was like the first black executive in the NFL with the Steelers, personnel guy, was a trailblazer, and was largely responsible in many ways for a Steelers dynasty of the 70s in terms of bringing in talent from HBCUs. Well, they renamed the award after Bill this year, and yet somebody didn't think long or hard about this. The irony of it is that a black person has never won that award. And so to name an award after a man who fought for, diversity and equality and whatnot, and yet never have a black win that award, to me, it's, I don't want to go so far as to say it's offensive, but it's definitely disrespectful. And so I say to people, how is it that Ralph Wiley has never won that award? How is it that Brian Burwell never won that award? How is it that Bill Rhoden has never won that award? How is it that Jared Bell has never won that award? Yeah. What are we saying here, that we have this award which recognizes supposedly the lifetime contributions of people who cover the NFL, and there is not one black person whose name is on that award? I find that to be a travesty. And so going forward, that is one of the things I'm going to be speaking on, even though it may rankle some of my colleagues who happen to be white. But I'm like, you have to understand, to us, representation matters. Yeah. And for the next little kid who's coming along who sees that, walks through the Hall of Fame and sees that award, he needs to see it, or he or she needs to see a Ralph Wiley, or a Jared Bell, or a Bill Rhoden, or Brian Burwell, because that allows them to dream and say, you know what, man, if he can be here or she can be here, I can be here. That's just how I feel about it.
Hey, you touched on a lot right there, right? So one thing that I wanna touch on, and it hit social media tough, really hard, and it was one of them things, like you just said, you earned your stripes in this business, and at this point you can say things unapologetically and whatever, but you're gonna put the word out how it needs to be put out. And recently during Super Bowl, I forgot what it was, but had Roger Goodell there, and you got up and you had some real words for him, just as far as as the NFL, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about X, Y, and Z, but the numbers don't show. Just speak on that, and obviously, you said it at this point. This is like your calling as far as being able to speak for the speakers. You know what I'm saying? For the people who don't have that voice. To just speak on that a little bit, and just were you setting up for that, or was it just something that came to your heart at that moment in time?
No, it had been on my heart for a while, because here's the thing: we have seen over the last 5 years, whatever, the numbers roll back in terms of black head coaches, and for a period there, even among general managers, we had seen the numbers in terms of diversity roll back with general managers, and so. I'll never forget this. I'm in Indianapolis at the Combine one year, and I go upstairs, as you guys know, in the city center, 3rd floor. I'm going to go get something to eat real quick. And there's like a half dozen black coaches that I know who are hanging out, sitting there talking. And I'm just going to walk by and go get my food. And they were like, Jim, come here. And they called me over and they said, you got to do something about this. And I said, about what? And they said, the lack of black coaches, head coaches. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, I'm doing all I can. What are you guys doing? You guys won't speak up on it. And then they're like, well, we can't. If we do, then we're not going to climb that ladder. We're going to be ostracized. Yeah. And I knew that to be true. And so I started thinking about it more. And one of the people who was sitting there was the late Daryl Drake, longtime wide receiver coach, Cardinals, Steelers, everywhere else. And so Daryl says to me, I'll speak on it. And he said, I'm at the end. He said, so I don't have anything to lose. I'll speak on it. And so I said, look, coach, I said, do this. Let me give you a few weeks and you think about it. And if you really want to speak on it, I said, I'll write about it. And so I gave him a few weeks and I called him and he said, yeah. He goes, I'll say something on it. And so I ended up writing a story there. And it was from that point forward that it became a big focus for me. Because here's the thing that people don't understand. They think it's just numbers, or that we're after, something that maybe we shouldn't have, or whatever their thoughts are. And they always hear this crap about you should be able to hire the best person, period, regardless of race and this and the other. And I say to them, I agree with you 100% on that.
100%.
But the best people aren't being hired. And so when Brian Flores files his lawsuit, I remember I called Clarence Shellman, longtime running back coach with the Seahawks, the Cowboys, and the Chargers. And he coached Emmitt Smith. He coached LaDainian Tomlinson. He was an offensive coordinator with the Chargers 5 years when North Turner was there. They went to the playoffs 3 times. He didn't call plays, but he ran all the offensive meetings. He designed the run game, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, Coach, what do you think about Brian Flores' lawsuit? And he said to me, that's the reason I got out of the game. And I said, well, speak on that. And he said, Jim, he said, it is emasculating. And that's his word. He said, it is emasculating and it is devastating that you can spend all of your adult life doing everything to prepare yourself to reach the highest levels of this game. Yeah. And then when you get to that point, you are not given an opportunity to chase your dream. But yet people who are younger, who are not as qualified, or who have a certain name are given those opportunities. He said it is emasculating, it is devastating. He said ultimately what it came to was that he realized what the NFL was about. He saved his money and he left on his own terms. And he said that he could not look himself in the mirror and be part of a system that is so systemically racist. And he said he understands other coaches can't do that financially, but he was able to. And he has been out a decade, and the thing that stuck with me is that he said, even after a decade, it still stays with you. And so when we hear the NFL talk about the importance of mental health and taking care of your mental health, I don't think they fully understand how damaging and how traumatic it is that when Blacks are being discriminated against in this hiring process, what that does to their mental health and how long that stays with them. And so again, my focus is every opportunity I get, I'm gonna shine a light on this because it's not right, and people need to understand how this is impacting these men.
Yeah.
So obviously, you don't get a lot of access to Roger, but we all know that the one time that you do is at the Super Bowl. So I said, okay, when Steve and I were doing our podcast, we went to the NFL 3 different times to try and get Roger Goodell on our podcast. First time was after he did that sit down with Emmanuel Acho. And I remember watching it saying, the only person uncomfortable in this conversation is me. This black man is uncomfortable with this conversation. He's not being asked questions that he needs to be asked.
Yeah.
So we went to the NFL and asked to have him on our podcast. It goes nowhere. We get halfway through the season. We go back. We get nowhere. We do it one final time. We get nowhere. So I said, fine. We've gone through the steps of trying to have him on to have a real conversation about it. So this is my opportunity to ask him a question. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I want to frame it, because you know he's going to wiggle his way out of it. That's just the way he's prepped for that. So I'm like, okay, I know the ground rules going in, but how can I be as pointed and as direct as possible to say, I need you to really understand what I'm saying here. And so I said, okay, when I read the league's initial response to Brian Flores' lawsuit, and they said diversity, equity, and inclusion are core principles in the NFL, and I said, that's my opening, because that is straight up bullshit.
Right.
I mean, it's bullshit because the numbers don't reflect it. And so I wanted to say to him, if that is what the league is saying, let's provide some context before I ask you what I want to ask you about that. And so then we get into the number of black head coaches, the number of black GMs, and how in the history of this league, really, discrimination has been a problem as it relates to head coaches. Knowing that this league has been around for over 100 years, 24 of the 32 teams in the NFL, that's 3/4 of the teams, have had one black head coach or none in its history, in their histories. 13 franchises, which is nearly half of the league, have never had a black head coach. But you're going to sit here and tell me that diversity, equity, and inclusion are core principles in the NFL. So then I said, well, wait a minute. And again, this is me formulating all this in my mind. And I'm asking myself, how is he going to respond to this? And I know what he's going to say. He's going to say that's on the owners. The league doesn't do the hiring for teams. Owners do. And we know the owners aren't there to answer the question. So I said, no. I need to put this directly at his shoes then, if that's what he's going to do. So I looked at the league office. Of the top 11 executives at the NFL, only 2 blacks are among those 11. When I look at the NFL media group where I work and where we cover a player population that is between 70 and 80% black, there is not one black person at the senior management level in the newsroom who is at the table when decisions are being made about how these men are going to be covered. So while Roger can put the onus on the owners as it relates to head coaches, GMs, club presidents, the league office and the NFL media group fall under his umbrella. So now you can't sit there and say that diversity, equity, and inclusion are core principles and blame the owners for the lack of those things. And now we look at what you control and the numbers are no better. And in fact, in some cases, they're worse. That's why I just said, you know what? Ultimately, the question here then is, what do you and the owners have against hiring black people at the highest levels of the NFL in decision-making positions, period? And that's how the question came up.
No, I commend you. I commend you, man, because it was definitely something that needed to be asked to the head guy. So again, man, I commend you for that, and obviously all the great work that you do. The biggest disappointment from all of that is that I haven't heard from him. So you would think since then, let's have a conversation. He would have reached out to you and said, "Hey, Jim, let me expand on this." And nothing.
Unfortunately, that's not even shocking to me, because I feel like, we get, and obviously you've been here a lot longer than I have, and we get a lot of lip service, we get a lot of slogans, we get a lot of, and the questions you ask. And people, even the race norming thing, like we just kind of talked about that for a day, swept that under the rug. Like that should have been one of the biggest issues ever to come up as far as the stain on the NFL and the shield and everything that they talk about. So it's not shocking, but I love that you definitely brought that, put his feet to the fire in a sense, and brought that question to him because, you know, people love to talk about the field and the players, and that's really the only place where you really you got to earn your spot. There is no, like, everybody's keeping track. Everybody's keeping tabs from the moment we leave high school, basically. So you can't finesse that. But as soon as you get off that field, you get to the coaches, you get to the scouts, you get to the entire ecosystem around these sports, the media spaces, the networks, they all get wider and wider the higher you go up. And this is across, you know, the country. This is not even just in sports. This is corporations, period. So it definitely needs to be a fix. You know, part of that is, you know, us coming together too and, you know, putting our money together and building our own in a sense. But while we're here continuing to build this one, we need more representation, you know, at the highest point. So like AB said, man, appreciate the work that you're doing on the forefront of that.
No, I appreciate it. But the thing that gets me too is we have to be very careful here about that we don't fall for the old okie doke, because what we heard in that press conference too is Roger talking about that they would like to have a black owner, right? Mm-hmm. A black owner, you know. But let's just say there's one. And as I've said, I don't just want a black owner. I want a black owner who is socially conscious and who represents the views of this community, because I don't need a guy in there or a woman in there who is on board with everything that these other owners are talking about or doing. As we like to say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I want someone in there who is speaking up on behalf of the issues that represent our community. And if we don't have that, I don't care if you have a black person in there. You know.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And unfortunately, the spot that we're in, if you are a black billionaire, it's most likely, you know, a part of you getting there is, you know, making white people feel very comfortable and being in those rooms. And it's not too many of us around here that aren't in that space, honestly. And I've sat at the table, you know, during the 2017, after the 2016 when Colin started the protest, 2017 when the president at the time made those statements, and then that's when a lot more people got on board with the protest, at least for a couple of weeks. I think that kind of radicalized more players in a sense, because he kind of drew that line in the sand. And in that, you know, we were sitting at the table literally with these owners and just listening to them talk. And it was different. I'm like, okay, these dudes don't give a,
they don't care
at all. Like they pretend to listen, and we know they're only here to find a way to get us off a knee. And so much so, one of the owners actually said out of his mouth to a player that was there, "Hey, you actually had." They did thorough research on all of us. They actually, when they left, it was a packet that had all of our name, basically a bio, a picture, and then all of the times that we spoke out, whether it's regarding the military, whether it's regarding social justice, like literally quotes. So they had their research on us. And he actually pointed to one of the players, was like, "Hey man, we need literal words. We need to put a Band-Aid on this situation. Wow. We need to face, obviously you're black. There was a couple white players there as well. You're black. Your cousin was actually killed by a police officer. So we need you to kind of be on the forefront of this." So I'm like, that really opened my eyes, like right in my face. Like, these dudes don't really, they all they care about is the bottom line, how they look on the front end. And it was wild to see. So that's why I've kind of, I don't want to say lost hope as far as getting equity and all these things that we want in this league, but it's gonna happen, man. It's disappointing, man. I'm pro.
But
Bill Jones, man.
Let me turn this around on you two for a second, because I get this question all the time. So what role does the player play in all of this? You know, like when we talk about Brian Flores' lawsuit, or we talk about the lack of blacks as head coaches or GMs, the players have a tremendous amount of power, whether they realize it or not. Mm-hmm. So what role do the players play in change, in making change?
I Go ahead, B. I'll go after you.
Nah, go ahead. So I like to make a so if you look at the NBA, right, and I feel as though NBA is way ahead of the NFL, right, when it comes to some of these situations, right? And you look at the NBA, and their top players, LeBron, Chris Paul, they step up into the forefront and say X, Y, and Z. On our front, we do have black players that are at that level. But for the majority, when you have these quarterbacks at that time, you got to think about a Drew Brees, a Peyton, a Tom Brady. Those guys not going to step up and voice their opinion. So what you're saying as far as players, we do have a lot of power. But the conversations, even when they were in the locker room, it's like, because I was there with the college situation, and we used to tell the guys, like, look, if you don't know what to say, don't say nothing. Obviously, we know that you're with the calls, but when you put this microphone in front of your face and them cameras in front of you, you might get shook up. You might say something that you didn't really mean to say, or they might ask you something and you might get stuck. So again, but for the veteran guys, it's like, yo, we're gonna speak up. We're gonna speak our piece, where we stand and how we feel. But again, you have the younger players who, like, on their first year contract, like, yo, this is how I eat. Like, I can't. And who am I to say, right, forget that? Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so again, obviously, it's the power in numbers, and we do have, but again, you always gonna have some folks that, look, man, I'm riding with y'all, but man, I got so-and-so deal and so-and-so deal, and I know we had a meeting in Arizona, and I voiced that opinion, right? I'm like, look, like I'm with the shits. Let's do X, Y, and Z. And it was some players that was like, man, I'm with it. It was some other players that was like, man, I don't think that's the right thing to do. X, Y, and Z. I'm like, oh, that's your opinion. But this is why we're at where we at, because some of the biggest names, right, that look like us are not willing to stand across other owners. And until honestly, like, don't get me wrong, Antoine Bethea, Darius Butler, yeah. But when you would have, if you would have some of the biggest names that look like us and say, man, nah, this is what we're doing, I think it would change the whole narrative and the whole situation.
That would definitely help because it's basically the big dogs essentially have to protect everyone else that are expendable, right? Yeah. So when I think it was some players that got together and did a commercial, which basically forced Goodell's hand to directly apologize to Colin, because they were doing a lot of lip service stuff, but dancing around the Colin Kaepernick thing, and it was like Mahomes, right, Watson at the time, Odell, like big names where it was like, all right, we can't ignore when Patrick Mahomes get up there. So to create the real change as far as on the player level, you definitely need the top dogs, and like you said, a lot of them don't want to put their neck out there, regardless of where they are in their grade. It could be a player in year 11, making X amount, $25 million a year, but it's like, they got their brands they want to protect. They don't want to lose sponsors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of it. But on the bigger scheme of things, and there is some responsibility on players, but in reality, I don't think that the big change is going to come from the player level. If we like the players, and it's not to excuse, responsibility and all that, but that's the labor. Like this is the labor. These are skilled athletes, and a lot of these athletes have put everything into being that. Like that, like you said, in high school, like, all right, I'm probably not gonna go on and play professionally, but like if a guy 15, they knew, like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. That's where they put their intention. Their surroundings, they may not have been educated on a lot of these things, so those guys are going to basically go and play where the best situation suits them. And this, as a player, you got a very small window, right, and AB was very fortunate. I mean, something you can only dream of, playing 14 years as a defensive back. I got very fortunate playing 9 years. A lot of these guys come in, you got a short window. So reality, these people ain't about to ruffle nobody's feathers. Like, people not going to turn down a $5 raise to go work somewhere else that they may feel a little more uncomfortable with how the situation is there. So I'm not going to realistically look at a 24-year-old and say, yeah, put your, $850,000 on the line where you may not ever get another opportunity. So I think if it's a situation where there is, and I always go back to this, because like I said, maybe I'm just pessimistic to this point, but where there is another league, where there is somewhere else that at least creates another place for these players to go. And it's kind of something similar on the HBCU level. People always say the players, if all the black players just leave high school and go to HBCUs, that'll change the. But yeah, these people, you're not going to ask an 18. You can't ask 18-year-old like Travis Hunter when he did it. But a lot of these guys, they want to go to the big schools and have all the fly gear and fly charters and do all this different stuff. And as a parent, you want to situate. You want your kid to go to the best situation to go to the next level. So it's hard to ask the players. Now, if you get the smart people, the people with money, the people with resources, and you pouring into these HBCUs, that's going to make it play on an even competitive level. You're going to have a lot more black players go to these institutions. So I think a lot of people look at the players, but I look at maybe because I was in the locker room with a lot of these guys, and I know what those guys, what we focus on at that point. And it's a lot more people who are more in the trenches, more educated on these things, have more resources at their disposal that can really create that change. And I think the players are kind of like, we're going to go and play in the best situation we can go and play. Now, unless you can unify, but it's hard to get 1,696 guys on the same page. That's a lot of different situations, a lot of different mouths to feed and things. So it is some responsibility on players, but I just hope that maybe it just puts a light on, okay, the players the situations that these individuals are in. And, ultimately you got to make some sacrifice to get some change for the group. But individually, man, it's going to be tough if we're looking for change from that player level.
I think what you said there is the key, though. And this is historically, whether it relates to civil rights or anything else, change requires sacrifice. And so folks have to ask them, how much are they willing to sacrifice? I'll never forget during the labor negotiation back in 2011, I was out with a starting quarterback, MVP caliber quarterback, and was working on a piece. And I remember asking him, how come I don't see more quarterbacks involved in these labor negotiations? I said, because you guys have power. You quarterbacks, you're the face of the league. And I'll never forget this. We were talking privately, so I won't say his name or anything. But he told me, he said, Jim, you got to understand, we have business relationships with these owners after we're done playing. And a lot of guys aren't going to jeopardize that. And I was like, wow, So, and I didn't want to judge, but I'm saying, so it's all about you, as opposed to the collective. And the owners understand that. And that's the danger, as you say, getting 1,600 guys on the same page. This is, and I say this respectfully. So if the NFL is listening, they can't come back and say I said something bad. But this is, NFL owners are diabolical geniuses from the standpoint they have created a business model where they bring in labor, and before that labor realizes that this is a business and not a game, that labor is out of the league.
Hey, time is up.
Yeah, we're talking about an average career span, let's just say 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they just keep turning it over. And that's one of the reasons I believe that players will never come together in total, is because of the short length of the career spans. And also because by the time that they realize that this is a business, they're out of the league. So I agree with both of you, especially Antoine saying the bigger name guys are the ones who have to give cover to the quote unquote rank and file. And if those guys aren't willing to do it, it's not going to matter. So anyway, that's my.
They know. Even in them 30, you got 30 billionaires together. Like, it's easy for them to be unified, and they could hate each other's guts, but they know when they sit at a round table,
which some of them do.
Yeah, we got this system, and this is in place, and it's working, and that's why when it was, and it's so discouraging, man. I was on those calls back in 2017, and literally been on and I'm like, I remember I was on a call with a bunch of the representatives from the different teams, the player reps, and I said, hey, this is the point we got. And this is the first time that I can remember where we're literally, at the table. because they were like sweating, like, hey man, I'm losing sponsorships on my hockey team and on this and on that because of what's going on with the protests and whatnot. So they were scrambling, and I was like, all right, this is a situation where we have a voice and we have some power here, and guys can collectively come together. And this, I wanted to say, it was like a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday. I said, if we even threaten to, and this is the first time that I had ever been on a conference call with 20 guys, 25 different guys from different teams. If we even threaten to, all right, we're not going to play this week, or we're not going to practice this Friday. I said, bro, if we have a list of demands, like those demands are going to be met. They don't want to miss football. And one of the biggest guys that was involved in this whole thing was like, hey, nah, that's not what I'm on. I'm not. We try to get the football, like, and I'm like, I was done with the conversation at that point. I'm like, what are we even all talking about if we're not willing to at least put on the front like we're not gonna play football for a week,
right?
And so it definitely gets discouraging. But I mean, the more we talk about it, the more, like you said, understanding the business side of understanding how important we are, being that cog in the machine that makes the thing go, and it's unified. It's tough to do, but somehow, some way it can happen, and I'm hopeful that it does. But that's kind of a big reason of the situation that we're in. But I know we've been going for a while. I want to ask you some things about your career personally while we got you here. We talked about your time in San Diego, and one of my favorite players coming up. I actually live in San Diego. I was the first player. I was born in Germany, Army brat, and then moved to San Diego, lived on a naval base out there. And one of my favorite players, young, was Junior Seau. And I know you wrote a book about Junior Seau. I had a chance to actually play with him for 1 year too in New England. What were some of your favorite moments, stories, or covering the Chargers and Seau out there?
Yeah, you can't see it right now in the background. There's a framed jersey from Junior that's signed. It's actually a game-worn jersey from his time with Miami when he played the Chargers for the first time after he got traded, the year after he got traded from San Diego. Mm-hmm. And I never forget, he left that for me. And so I framed it and whatnot and have it in my room here just as a reminder. Let me say this to you first about Junior. I literally am not in this position today without him. And people need to understand the impact that he had. And this is how he touched so many people, that obviously he made everyone feel special. He had that type of personality. But he would seek to help you in any way he could. So I had never been an NFL reporter before. I had covered high schools, a little bit of minor league hockey, and 1 year of the NBA when the San Diego Union Tribune said, hey, we want you to cover the Chargers. So this is the off season. Very first day I walk in the locker room. At that time, the Chargers practice facility was out at the old Qualcomm Stadium. I walk in the locker room in the off season. There are only two players in there, and it's Junior and one other player who I don't even remember. And they're on the far side of the locker room, and he's walking towards the training room. He turns around and he sees me, and he says, calls me over. And the first thing that was so weird is he introduces himself as if I don't know who he is.
No.
And he says, oh, you're the new guy. And I'm like, yeah, and introduce myself. So we talked for a minute. He said, look, take my number. And he said, if you need anything, you call me. And I'm like, I had heard some of the stories about at times he could be kind of difficult with the media and whatnot. So I'm thinking, okay, this dude's setting me up for something. And so I take the number and I said, well, I'm not going to call it right away, whatever. But I'm curious in my mind, is this legit? So I wait a couple of weeks and there was something minor that happened or whatever. And so I called the number. And like I'm expecting to get Domino's Pizza or something.
Uh-huh.
And it's his voicemail. And I leave a message, and shortly after he calls me back. So I'm like, this dude is genuine. The funny thing is, so we developed a relationship over the years. And the funny thing is that people always thought he was feeding me information. Mm-hmm. Anyone who knows Junior knows he was so protective of the team that he was never going to do anything to damage the team. What he did for me is he helped me understand the culture of a locker room. He helped me understand the culture of the NFL from a player's perspective. And I'll give you an example. So 1 year early in my career covering the NFL, the Chargers go out and they sign Ryan McNeil, cornerback, to a big contract. And we get to training camp, and Ryan McNeil looks awful. No, and when I say awful, man, I mean awful.
Yeah.
So I'm getting ready thinking, okay, I'm going to have to write a story here about how they just wasted a bunch of money on this dude who can't play. So Junior's the leader of the team, the defense, obviously. So I go to him and I said, hey, man, what's going on with this dude? You know, it's supposed to be like your marquee signing. And Junior says to me, look, here's what you need to understand about veteran players. Veteran players use training camp to work on their weaknesses, not their strengths. And he said, so you're not going to always look as good as you would in a game. And so I kind of tucked that away. I'm like, all right. And I didn't write anything. Long story short, we get to the end of the season. Ryan McNeil leads the NFL in interceptions that year.
Mm-hmm.
He had 10. And so imagine how foolish I would look if I had written that story. But that was Junior helping me to understand, you know, a player's mindset and what they go through in terms of their preparation, their approach, all of these sorts of things. So that's what he did for me, is that by helping me understand the culture of a locker room and the mentality of a player and whatnot, it helped me better foster relationships with players in terms of that I'm not coming at them as some armchair quarterback saying, I know more than you do, you know? And my attitude was really help me learn, help me understand so that I can better represent you when I write about it. And it encompasses, you know, your viewpoint and what you're going through and all that kind of stuff, the background stuff. So Junior was that guy for me. And over the years, and we had our moments too. I'll tell you a quick story where there was one year he gets a contract extension, and it makes him the highest paid defensive player in the NFL. Well, a few weeks later, they announce a new TV deal or whatever, and the salary cap spikes, takes a tremendous jump. So Junior is thinking, and this is not what he has said to me, this is piecing everything together, that, hey, they pulled a fast one on me. They signed me to this extension before the cap jumped, and I could have gotten more money than what I got. So the Chargers have a voluntary mini camp the following week or two. Junior doesn't show up. It's the first time he has ever missed a mini camp, voluntary or mandatory, whatever. So the general manager at the time and the head coach start going off. This is Junior being selfish, yada, 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 yada. And I'm like, whoa, they have never talked about Junior like this before. This is like, you know, the face of the franchise, the local boy, all that stuff. Everyone's always careful what they say. They might say it privately, but never publicly. But here they are publicly going after him. I called Junior's cell phone. I called his house phone. I called his top assistant. All these people, nobody returned a call. So now put yourself in my shoes as a writer. What do? You got the GM and the head coach saying these things about him. And on the other side, you got a player and his reps, none of whom are returning calls. What do you do as a reporter? Well, you got to report what they said. So I do. The next time I see Junior is at training camp. And as I come walking up to him, he's in a golf cart with Kurt Govea. And I swear, my hand to God, it is the only time in my professional career where I ever felt threatened and scared. And he looked at me and he said, hard copy, get the fuck out of here. And for those who don't know, Hard Copy was that show back in the day that was, you know, sensational headlines and all that type of stuff. He's like, hard copy, get the fuck out of here. He did not talk to me again until like Thanksgiving. It was, and I remember specifically because I had heard that he had changed within the locker room from different people. And he was more at peace and calm and all these sorts of things. But again, he wasn't talking to me. So around Thanksgiving, I put in a request to interview him. He grants me the interview. And then he just bears his soul about some things where I'm like, holy shit, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah.
And we get to the off season. This is the thing I respected most about Junior. He always tried to learn from situations, even from his mistakes or what people might perceive to be his mistakes. He calls all the writers out to his restaurant that off season, and he basically apologizes. And then he and I had a private conversation where I said to him, Junior, I can't read minds. And I said, all I ask is that you put yourself in my shoes in those situations. I came to you to try and get your side of this story, and nobody, not you, not your rep, not anyone, would speak to give your side of this story. I said, so what would you do in my shoes? and he understood it. The next time some controversial things came up, it was never a problem getting him to at least understand his side of the story, including when he was traded. So those are the things I remember about Junior, is just how giving he was. And when he first had that retirement press conference with the Chargers, and then like a week later signed with New England, the day of that press conference, he said, come down to the restaurant. I'm going to have some family and friends, and we're just going to chill for a minute. So I said, okay. We're literally sitting at a table. It's me, his physical therapist, like the executor of his foundation, various people. It's like maybe 6 to 8 of us. And literally, we went around that table, made him so uncomfortable, saying to him what he meant to us in terms of helping our careers, and how none of us are where we were at that time without him, and what he did for us. And I'll never forget that moment, man. And that's just who he was, man. He was that dude where even now we're coming up on, in May, it'll be 10 years since he took his life. And I still have people today who say to me, man, I miss him, you know? Yeah. And that's how we feel. That's who he was.
I had to ask you about him and you guys' relationship before we got out. Cause I'm one of those people. I was around him for a short period of time, especially as a young, and he was one of those guys. I was like Tom Brady, Randy Moss, and then for me, like Seau in that locker, I'm like, man, this is a guy, growing up, this was like a god on that football field on the defensive side of it, and just how he treated people. He was always so cool. He would be one of the first guys in there just playing his ukulele, in the cuts where didn't know anybody's name. Yeah. I mean, didn't tell everybody was buddy. Hey, buddy. They was playing with him on the field. Hey, he gonna switch plays. He gonna do what the hell he want out there. So I had to ask you about Junior before we let you go.
Yeah, I know you gotta get out of here.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I gotta run here. I gotta take the wife to a doctor's appointment. She's texting me now saying I'm 15 minutes late. So
definitely appreciate you, man. We're gonna have to get you back on here, man, because there's some other things we want to definitely touch on. But as always, Jim, man, appreciate you and as appreciate all the work that you do, man.
Man, believe me, I'm humbled to be on the show. You guys can get me anytime you need me. I love what you guys are doing. AB, I've known you for forever, man. So you know how I feel about you and respect and appreciate you. And Darius, you're doing it with him. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to coming back, man.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you,
Thanks for joining us.
All right, fellas.
All right.
I got to run here.
All right, take care.
Y'all going to get me in trouble here. All right, fellas. Be well.
All right. You too.
Man, that was a good one, man. I got Jim Trotter. Again, man of many titles. Dope stories of Junior Seau. Definitely a man that's doing it the right way in the writing space and the reporter space, man. So again, thank you, Jim, for stopping by and joining us.
Absolutely. Now you have it, man. Another episode, the Man to Man Pod, the great Jim Trotter joined us. Another HU alumni. It was great talking to him, man. Definitely gonna have to have him back on the show. Appreciate y'all tapping in with us. You already know the vibes. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff, man. We out of here.
Peace.
Man to man. Yeah, we talking. Man to man. They can't guard me. Man to man. They don't wanna see us, man to man. They don't know how to beat us, man to man. Man to man, man to man, man to man, man to man. Yeah, man. Must be the struggle that's in me, that's why I want it so bad. Must be the hustler in me that keep my foot on the gas. When you got it from nothing and hard times ain't so bad. Just know I'm coming for everything that they said I couldn't have. I put my life inside it, yeah, I kept it solid. Yeah, I played the field, that's how I feel about it. We put numbers on the board, we always up the score. Yeah, we stuck to the plan and never ran. Now they can't see it, man. Yeah, we talking, man to man. They they can't guard me. Man to man, they don't wanna see us. Man to man, they don't know how to beat us. Man to man, man to man, man to man.
Any way we can get it, baby. Any way we can get it.